The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on the back of Ethan Carter's neck as he hammered the last fence post into the hard-packed earth. Sweat dripped into his eyes and his shoulders ached from 6 hours of back-breaking work. At 26, he'd been working his family's cattle ranch since he could walk, but some days the labor still wore him down to nothing. He straightened up, wiping his brow with his forearm, and surveyed the newly repaired fence line stretching across the property. The Carter Ranch had been in his family for 4 generations, 3,000 acres of Wyoming grassland, rolling hills, and stubborn cattle that seemed determined to find every weak spot in every fence on the property. "Looking good, boss." Ethan turned to find Jake Morrison leaning against the fence, his weathered face creased in a grin. Jake had worked for the Carters for 20 years since before Ethan was born and was as much a part of the ranch as the land itself. "Thanks, Jake, though I'm pretty sure my back is never going to be the same." "That's what you get for doing the work yourself instead of hearing it out." Jake pushed off the fence and walked over, examining Ethan's handiwork with a critical eye. "Your daddy would have had this done by a crew." "Yeah, well, Dad also wasn't trying to keep this place afloat on a shoestring budget." Ethan gathered his tools, loading them into the back of his beat-up Ford. "Speaking of which, any word from the applicants for the ranch hand position?" "Got 3 callbacks. One of 'em sounds promising, guy named Wyatt Cole, just moved to the area from Montana. Got solid references, 15 years of experience with cattle, horses, hay operations, the works." "When can he start?" "He's coming by tomorrow morning for an interview, 8 a.m. sharp." Ethan nodded, calculating in his head. They desperately needed another hand. His father's sudden death 8 months ago had left Ethan scrambling to keep the ranch running while dealing with grief, paperwork, and the crushing realization that his dad had left the finances in worse shape than anyone had known. His mother had moved to Arizona to live with her sister, unable to bear staying on the ranch without her husband of 35 years. His sister Claire had her own life in Denver, a corporate job that kept her chained to a desk and far away from ranch life. That left Ethan, the dutiful son who'd never wanted to be anywhere else, holding the bag. Or, in this case, holding 3,000 acres of responsibility. "Tell him I'll be here," Ethan said. "And Jake, thanks for everything, I know this hasn't been easy." Jake clapped him on the shoulder with a calloused hand. "Your daddy was a good man and so are you, we'll get through this, the ranch has survived worse." Ethan wasn't so sure about that, but he appreciated the sentiment. He drove back to the main house as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house felt too big and too empty these days. His parents had raised 3 kids here and it had always been full of noise and life. Now it echoed with silence. He showered, threw together a quick dinner of leftover stew, and collapsed on the couch with a stack of bills that needed reviewing. The numbers swam before his eyes: feed costs, equipment repairs, mortgage payments that seemed to multiply like rabbits. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, his phone alarm was blaring and sunlight was streaming through the windows. 6:30 a.m. time to get moving. Ethan went through his morning routine on autopilot: coffee, quick breakfast, out to the barn to check on the horses and start morning feeding. The physical work helped clear his head, focusing his mind on the immediate tasks instead of the larger problems looming over everything. At 7:55, a dusty black Chevy truck pulled into the drive. Ethan watched from the barn as a man climbed out and his breath caught in his throat. The stranger was tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out a faded denim shirt in a way that suggested hard-earned muscle, not gym workouts. Dark brown hair showed under a well-worn black Stetson, and even from this distance Ethan could see sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. The man moved with an easy, confident grace as he approached, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "Ethan Carter," the voice was deep and smooth, with a hint of Montana drawl. "That's me." Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand. "You must be Wyatt Cole." "Yes, sir." Wyatt's handshake was firm, his palm calloused. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-green like storm clouds over sagebrush, and they met Ethan's with an intensity that made Ethan's pulse quicken unexpectedly. Ethan cleared his throat, annoyed at his reaction. He'd been so focused on keeping the ranch running that he'd barely thought about his personal life in months. And he certainly wasn't about to start thinking about it now, not with a potential employee standing in front of him. Jake tells me you've got 15 years of experience. Yes, sir. Started working ranches when I was 14. Spent time in Montana, Idaho, and Colorado before deciding to settle down here in Wyoming. Wyatt shifted his weight, comfortable in his own skin. Did everything from calving to breaking horses to running hay operations. I can handle machinery, do basic veterinary work, and I'm not afraid of long hours or hard work. Why'd you leave Montana? Something flickered across Wyatt's face, too quick for Ethan to identify. Time for a change. Montana's beautiful, but I was ready to put down roots somewhere new. A buddy of mine mentioned Wyoming had good opportunities, so here I am. It was a perfectly reasonable answer, but Ethan sensed there was more to it. Still, everyone had their reasons for moving on. God knew he had his own secrets. Let me show you around, give you a sense of the operation. They spent the next 2 hours touring the property. Ethan showed Wyatt the pastures where they ran cattle, the barns and equipment sheds, the hay fields that would need cutting in a few months. Wyatt asked smart questions, made observations that showed he actually knew what he was looking at, and handled the horses Ethan introduced him to with the kind of casual confidence that came from years in the saddle. You run about 300 head, Wyatt asked as they stood looking out over the main grazing pasture. 350 right now. We've scaled back from what my dad used to run, trying to focus on quality over quantity. Ethan leaned against the fence rail. The market's been tough the last few years. We've had to make some hard decisions. I heard your father passed recently. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Ethan's throat tightened the way it always did when someone mentioned his dad. It's been an adjustment. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the cattle graze. Ethan was acutely aware of Wyatt's presence beside him, the way he stood with one boot propped on the lower fence rail, the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, the faint smell of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. Stop it, Ethan told himself firmly. Focus. The job pays $45,000 a year plus room and board, Ethan said, forcing his mind back to business. There's a cabin out back that goes with the position, nothing fancy, but it's comfortable. You'd work 6 days a week, usually dawn to dusk depending on what needs doing. 1 day off, though during busy seasons like calving or harvest, everyone's hands on deck. Sounds fair. Wyatt turned to look at him, and Ethan found himself caught in those gray-green eyes. I'm interested if you're offering. You've got the experience, you clearly know what you're doing, and Jake's a good judge of character. He vouched for you, which carries a lot of weight with me. Ethan extended his hand. Welcome to the Carter Ranch, Wyatt. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. And stop calling me sir. Makes me feel about 70 years old. It's Ethan. Wyatt's lips curved into a smile that did something funny to Ethan's stomach. All right, Ethan, when do you want me to start? How about tomorrow? I'll have Jake show you to the cabin, help you get settled today if you want. Tomorrow works perfect. They shook on it, and Ethan tried not to notice how much he didn't want to let go of Wyatt's hand. This was going to be a problem, a serious problem. But right now, he needed the help more than he needed to worry about his inconvenient attraction to his new employee. Wyatt Cole moved into the ranch hand cabin that afternoon. It was small but well-maintained, 1 bedroom, a tiny bathroom, a combined living area and kitchenette, and a front porch with a view of the western pastures. He'd lived in worse, much worse, during his years bouncing from ranch to ranch across the Mountain West. What he hadn't mentioned during the interview was that he'd left Montana running from a relationship that had ended badly, very badly. Derek Morrison, no relation to Jake as far as Wyatt knew, had been the foreman on the ranch where Wyatt had worked for 3 years. They'd started a relationship quietly, keeping it hidden from the other hands and the ranch owners. In rural Montana, being openly gay wasn't exactly a career booster. They'd been careful, discreet, sneaking moments together when they could. Then Derek's wife found out. Wyatt hadn't known Derek was married. The man had played him perfectly, spinning stories about being divorced, separated, free to be together as soon as he got some things settled. By the time Wyatt discovered the truth, he was in too deep, emotionally invested in a man who'd been lying to him for months. When Derek's wife showed up at the ranch, things got ugly fast. She'd screamed accusations in front of everyone, called Wyatt every name in the book. Derek had stood there and let her, had chosen his marriage over the truth, had thrown Wyatt under the bus to save his own skin. The ranch owner had fired Wyatt on the spot, not for being gay, he'd claimed, but for causing drama and affecting workplace morale. So Wyatt had packed his truck and driven south, putting Montana in his rearview mirror and vowing never to make the same mistake again. No more workplace relationships. No more getting involved with someone who could cost him his job. He'd keep his head down, do his work, and guard his heart carefully. That resolution had seemed solid right up until he'd shaken Ethan Carter's hand. One look at those warm brown eyes, that genuine smile, the way Ethan's whole face lit up when he talked about the ranch, and Wyatt had felt something shift in his chest. Something he absolutely could not afford to feel. Ethan Carter was his boss. More than that, Ethan was clearly struggling to keep his family's legacy alive, dealing with grief and financial pressure and the weight of enormous responsibility. The last thing he needed was a ranch hand with a crush. So Wyatt would ignore the way his pulse had jumped when Ethan smiled at him. He'd ignore how attractive Ethan looked in worn jeans and a work shirt, all lean muscle and quiet confidence. He'd ignore the way he'd wanted to reach out and brush the dust from Ethan's cheek during the tour. He'd do his job, keep his distance, and absolutely not develop feelings for his boss. It was a good plan, a solid plan. It lasted approximately 12 hours. Wyatt's first day of work started at 5:30 a.m. when someone knocked on his cabin door. He stumbled out of bed, pulled on jeans, and opened the door to find Ethan standing there with 2 travel mugs of coffee. "Morning," Ethan said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Figured you could use this. Jake and I usually start the day with feeding, then we'll assess what needs doing. Today I want to move the herd from the south pasture to the north. Grass is better up there right now." Wyatt accepted the coffee gratefully. "Give me 5 minutes to get my boots on." "Take your time, meet me at the main barn when you're ready." Ethan walked away, and Wyatt absolutely did not watch the way his jeans fit. Nope, not at all. The morning passed in a blur of activity, feeding the horses, checking water troughs, loading hay onto the truck for distribution. Wyatt fell into the rhythm easily. This was work he'd done thousands of times before. What was different was working alongside Ethan. The man was a natural leader without being pushy about it. He worked just as hard as anyone else, wasn't afraid to get dirty, and treated Jake and Wyatt like equals rather than subordinates. When Jake's arthritic knee started bothering him mid-morning, Ethan immediately sent him to do lighter work and took over the heavy lifting himself. "You don't have to prove anything," Wyatt said as they hauled 50-pound feed bags into the barn. "We can handle this." "I'm not proving anything, I'm doing my job." Ethan hefted another bag onto his shoulder. "Besides, Jake's been here since before I was born. He's earned the right to take it easier." By the time they broke for lunch, Wyatt's respect for Ethan had grown considerably. This wasn't some absentee owner or someone who'd inherited a ranch and hired people to do all the work. Ethan was in the trenches, doing the hard physical labor alongside everyone else. They ate lunch on the porch of the main house, sandwiches that Ethan had thrown together, chips and cold beers pulled from a cooler. The Wyoming sun blazed overhead, and the view from the porch stretched for miles across rolling grassland. "So what brings a Montana ranch hand to Wyoming?" Jake asked, cracking open his beer. Wyatt had prepared for this question. Worked the same ranch for 3 years, felt like it was time for a change. I heard good things about this area, thought I'd give it a shot. It wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. Well, you picked a good place, Jake said. The Carters have been good people to work for. Ethan here's carrying on that tradition. Ethan looked uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just trying not to run the place into the ground. You're doing more than that, Jake said firmly. This ranch would have gone under months ago if you hadn't stepped up the way you did. Your daddy would be proud. Something painful flickered across Ethan's face. He stood abruptly. We should get moving if we want to get that herd moved before the heat of the afternoon. Moving 350 head of cattle was always an adventure. Wyatt saddled up a mare named Juniper, who Jake assured him was reliable and calm, and they set out to round up the herd. Ethan rode a big paint gelding with the kind of easy seat that came from growing up in the saddle. They worked together like they'd been doing it for years. Wyatt instinctively knew when to press the cattle forward, when to hold back, how to work in tandem with Ethan and Jake to guide the herd through the gate and into the north pasture. The cattle kicked up enormous clouds of dust, and the sound of their lowing filled the air. By late afternoon, the job was done. The three of them sat on their horses at the edge of the pasture, watching the cattle settle into their new grazing area. Good work today, Ethan said, looking at Wyatt. You handle yourself well with the herd. Thank you, Wyatt felt an absurd rush of pleasure at the praise. It's good work, good land. It is, isn't it? Ethan's gaze swept across the pasture, the distant mountains, the endless sky. I've traveled a bit, went to college in Colorado, spent a summer working in Texas, but I always come back here. This place is in my blood. There was such love in his voice, such deep connection to the land, that Wyatt felt something twist in his chest. He'd never had that, never had a place that felt like home, never had roots that ran deep. He'd been drifting for 15 years, one ranch to another, never staying long enough to really belong anywhere. What would it feel like to love a place the way Ethan loved this ranch? You're lucky, Wyatt said quietly. Not everyone gets to know where they belong. Ethan turned to look at him, and for a moment their eyes locked. Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, something that made Wyatt's breath catch. Then Jake's horse snorted, breaking the spell, and the moment passed. Let's head back, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. I'll show you how we do evening feeding. As they rode back toward the barns, Wyatt reminded himself of his rules. No workplace relationships, keep your distance, don't get involved. But with every hour he spent around Ethan Carter, those rules seemed harder and harder to follow. 3 weeks passed in a comfortable rhythm. Wyatt settled into life on the Carter Ranch, learning its quirks and routines. He discovered that Ethan was an early riser who liked his coffee black and strong, that Jake had an inexhaustible supply of stories about the ranch's history, and that the cattle had distinct personalities if you paid attention long enough. He also discovered that his attraction to Ethan wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting stronger. The problem was he was starting to think maybe it wasn't one-sided. There were little things, the way Ethan's eyes would linger on him sometimes, a fraction too long. How Ethan always seemed to find reasons to work alongside Wyatt instead of delegating tasks. The few times their hands had brushed accidentally, and the way Ethan had jerked back like he'd been burned. The conversations that stretched longer than necessary, both of them reluctant to end the interaction. It could all be in Wyatt's imagination. He was probably projecting, seeing what he wanted to see. But his gut told him something was there, humming in the space between them like an electrical current. The real question was, what was he going to do about it? The answer, he'd decided, was nothing. Ethan was his boss. Ethan was dealing with serious financial pressures. Ethan had given no indication that he was interested in men or interested in Wyatt specifically. Making a move would be inappropriate at best, potentially job-ending at worst. So Wyatt kept his distance, stayed professional. Tried very hard not to stare when Ethan took his shirt off during the heat of the day, revealing lean, tanned muscle and a scattering of scars from years of ranch work. Then came the night that changed everything. It started with a thunderstorm rolling in late on a Friday evening. Wyoming weather was unpredictable, 1 minute clear skies, the next minute dark clouds and lightning splitting the horizon. Wyatt was in his cabin just starting to think about dinner when his phone rang. "Wyatt, it's Ethan, we've got a situation." Lightning spooked the herd in the east pasture. Some of them broke through the fence. "I need help rounding them up before they get onto the highway." "I'm on my way." Wyatt grabbed his rain gear and ran to the barn. Ethan was already there, saddling his paint gelding. His face was tight with worry. "How many got out?" "Not sure, maybe 20, 30 head. Jake's checking the north side in case they went that direction." Ethan swung into the saddle. "Let's go." They rode out into the storm, rain pelting down in sheets. Lightning flickered across the sky and thunder rumbled so loud Wyatt could feel it in his chest. The cattle had scattered, driven by panic and instinct. Wyatt and Ethan split up, each working to gather the strays and push them back toward the pasture. It took 2 hours of hard riding in dangerous conditions. More than once Wyatt's horse stumbled on the slick ground and he had to use all his skill to stay in the saddle. He could see Ethan in the distance, a dark shape against the storm, working just as hard. Finally, they got the last of the cattle back through the fence. Jake had already started temporary repairs, reinforcing the damaged section. They all worked together to secure it as well as possible in the storm, knowing they'd have to come back tomorrow for a proper fix. By the time they finished, all 3 men were soaked through, exhausted and covered in mud. "Good work," Ethan said, having to raise his voice over the rain. "Jake, head home, get dry and warm. Wyatt and I can handle the horses." Jake didn't argue. The older man looked worn out. He climbed into his truck and drove off, leaving Wyatt and Ethan alone in the barn with 6 horses that needed to be unsaddled, rubbed down, and fed. They worked in tired silence, the only sounds the rain hammering on the barn roof and the horses' soft snorts and shuffling. Wyatt was shivering by the time they finished. His rain gear had done its best. But hours in the storm had left him chilled to the bone. "Come up to the house," Ethan said. "Get warmed up before you head to your cabin." "I don't want to impose." "Wyatt, you're hypothermic, you're not walking to your cabin like this." Ethan's voice left no room for argument. "Come on." The main house was warm and dry, a welcome relief after the storm. Ethan disappeared and came back with towels and a pile of dry clothes. "Showers down the hall, second door on the right. These might be a little big on you, but they're better than staying in wet clothes." Wyatt took the clothes gratefully, too cold to protest. The shower was everything he needed, hot water that slowly thawed his frozen muscles, washing away the mud and exhaustion. He dried off and pulled on the clothes Ethan had lent him. They were indeed a little big, but they were warm and dry, and they smelled like Ethan, something clean and masculine with a hint of cedar. When he emerged, he found Ethan in the kitchen, also freshly showered and changed. He was making hot chocolate of all things, 2 mugs steaming on the counter. "Figured we could both use this," Ethan said, handing Wyatt a mug. "There's whiskey in it for medicinal purposes." Wyatt cupped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. "Thanks for the shower, the clothes, this you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Ethan leaned against the counter, holding his own mug. "You put yourself in danger tonight helping me. That's not something I take lightly." "It's my job." "It's more than a job. You could have been hurt. Your horse could have broken a leg in the dark, or you could have been thrown, or—" Ethan stopped, his jaw tight. "I was worried." The admission hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm was starting to ease, the thunder more distant now. Inside, something else was building, a different kind of storm, one that had been gathering for weeks. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." Ethan set his mug down, his hands gripping the counter edge. I'm gay. Wyatt's heart stopped, started again beating double time. I've known since I was 16, Ethan continued, his voice low. Came out to my family when I was in college. They tried to be supportive. My dad especially tried, but I could tell it bothered him. Not that I was gay, but that it made my life harder, that it was another thing to worry about. Ethan! Let me finish. Ethan looked up, met Wyatt's eyes. I've dated a few guys over the years, never anything serious, never anyone from around here. I kept that part of my life separate, private. And when my dad died, I was so focused on keeping this ranch afloat that I put everything else on hold. I didn't have time or energy for relationships. I didn't have room in my life for complications. Wyatt's throat was dry. Okay. And then you showed up? Ethan's voice dropped even lower. And suddenly I'm having trouble remembering why I made those rules. I'm having trouble keeping my distance. I'm having trouble not thinking about you every spare second I have. The air felt too thick to breathe. Wyatt set down his mug carefully like it might shatter. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm attracted to you, have been since the first day, and I think maybe you feel the same way. It came out as a question, uncertain and vulnerable. Wyatt's heart was racing now. This was it, the moment where he could either step forward or step back, stay safe or take a risk, keep his rules or break them for something that might be worth it. I do, he said quietly, feel the same way. I've been trying not to because you're my boss and I didn't want to complicate things, but yeah, I'm attracted to you too. Relief flooded Ethan's face, quickly followed by something that looked like determination. He pushed off the counter, closing the distance between them. They were standing close now, close enough that Wyatt could see the water droplets still clinging to Ethan's hair, the pulse jumping in his throat. Tell me to stop, Ethan said, his hand coming up to cup Wyatt's jaw. Tell me this is a bad idea and I'll back off. We'll forget this conversation ever happened, but if you don't stop me, I'm going to kiss you. Wyatt's answer was to close the remaining distance, pressing his lips to Ethan's. The kiss was electric. All the weeks of tension, of stolen glances and careful distance exploded in that moment. Ethan kissed like he was starving for it, his hands moving to Wyatt's waist, pulling him closer. Wyatt threaded his fingers through Ethan's damp hair, angling his head to deepen the kiss. They broke apart for air, then came back together, unable to stay separated. Ethan backed Wyatt against the counter, their bodies pressed together, and Wyatt made a sound that was half gasp, half moan. Is this okay? Ethan asked, his lips moving to Wyatt's jaw, his neck. Yes, God, yes. They kissed until Wyatt's lips were swollen and his body was thrumming with want. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against Wyatt's. I probably should have thought this through better, Ethan admitted. Like maybe had this conversation when we weren't both exhausted and high on adrenaline. Wyatt laughed breathlessly. You think? But I don't regret it. Ethan pulled back enough to look Wyatt in the eye. I want this, if you want it too, but I also know it's complicated. You work for me and that creates a power dynamic that I don't want to abuse, so if you want to think about it or if you want to just keep things professional. I want this too, Wyatt interrupted. I know it's complicated. I know there are a dozen reasons why this is probably a bad idea, but I haven't felt this way about someone in a long time and I don't want to walk away without at least seeing where it could go. Yes. Yeah. Ethan kissed him again, softer this time, sweet. Okay, so we'll figure it out together. Together, Wyatt agreed. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the storm finally passed and the night settled into quiet. Wyatt knew there would be complications ahead. He knew they'd have to figure out how to navigate a relationship while working together, how to handle things if anyone found out, how to protect both themselves and the ranch. But right now, wrapped in Ethan's arms, he couldn't bring himself to worry about any of that. Right now, this was enough. Part 3: Secret Boundaries. The next morning, Wyatt woke up in Ethan's bed with sunshine streaming through the windows and a warm body pressed against his back. For a moment, he froze, then the memories of the night before came flooding back. The storm, the confession, the kiss that had turned into many kisses which had eventually led them upstairs. Ethan stirred behind him, his arm tightening around Wyatt's waist. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." Wyatt turned over to face him. In the early light, Ethan looked younger, more relaxed than Wyatt had ever seen him. "How are you feeling?" "Good, really good," Ethan smiled, soft and genuine. "You?" "Same." They lay there for a while, just looking at each other, neither quite believing this was real. Then reality intruded in the form of Wyatt's phone alarm going off. 5:30 a.m., time to start morning chores. Damn, Ethan sighed, real life. Unfortunately, Wyatt reluctantly sat up. "I should head to my cabin, get changed, Jake's going to be here soon." "Right, yeah." Ethan sat up too, running a hand through his messy hair. "Wyatt, about last night." "No regrets," Wyatt said firmly, "unless you do." "No, God, no, I just—" Ethan hesitated. "We should probably talk about how we want to handle this, what we tell people." That was the question, wasn't it? Wyatt thought about Jake, about the other ranchers in the area, about the small-town community where everyone knew everyone's business. He thought about Derek and Montana, about how badly things had ended when a secret relationship came to light. "I think we should keep it quiet," Wyatt said carefully. "At least for now, not because I'm ashamed, but because this is your ranch, your livelihood. I don't want to create problems for you." Ethan looked relieved and disappointed in equal measure. "You sure? I don't want you to feel like I'm hiding you." "I don't feel that way, I just think we should be smart about this. Take it slow, see where it goes, and not broadcast it to the whole county before we figure out what this even is." "That makes sense." Ethan reached out, taking Wyatt's hand. "But just so we're clear, I want this to be real, not just fooling around. If we're doing this, I want to actually date you, get to know you, build something." Warmth bloomed in Wyatt's chest. "I want that too." They kissed, morning breath and all, and then Wyatt reluctantly pulled away. "I really do need to go." "Okay, I'll see you at the barn in 20 minutes. Make it 15, I'll grab a quick shower." Wyatt snuck out the back door, doing a ridiculous combination of walking fast and trying to look casual. His cabin was only 100 yards from the main house, but it felt like a mile with his heart pounding and a stupid grin on his face. He showered, changed into work clothes, and made it to the barn with 2 minutes to spare. Jake was already there, feeding the horses. "Morning," the older man said. "Hell of a storm last night." "Sure was. Ethan and I got the cattle rounded up, but we'll need to do a proper fence repair today." "Already on my list." Jake gave him a shrewd look. "You all right? You look tired." "Just didn't sleep great with all the thunder." The lie came easily, but Wyatt felt a twinge of guilt. He liked Jake, respected him. Lying to the old cowboy felt wrong. Ethan appeared a few minutes later, and Wyatt had to actively stop himself from starring. Ethan looked good in the morning light, really good, and knowing what was under those clothes now made it hard to focus. "Get it together," he told himself firmly. They fell into the day's routine, but everything felt different, hyper-aware. Every time Wyatt and Ethan made eye contact, there was a charge to it. When their hands brushed while loading fence posts onto the truck, Wyatt felt it like an electric shock. During the truck ride out to the damaged fence, they sat close enough that their thighs touched, and Wyatt couldn't stop thinking about the night before. This was going to be harder than he'd thought. Jake worked with them most of the morning, which meant Wyatt and Ethan had to maintain absolute professionalism. No lingering looks, no casual touches, nothing that might give them away. It was simultaneously frustrating and thrilling, like they were teenagers sneaking around. Around noon, Jake headed back to the main area to work on some equipment maintenance, leaving Wyatt and Ethan alone at the fence line. Finally, Ethan breathed, immediately moving closer. I've been wanting to do this all morning. He kissed Wyatt quickly, urgently, like he'd been holding back for hours, which Wyatt supposed he had been. We're going to have to figure out how to work together without me wanting to kiss you every 5 minutes, Ethan said when they pulled apart. Is that a bad thing? It is when we're supposed to be fixing a fence. Thanks for watching.